Hello, all. Yet another completely off the cuff and badly done, very badly done YouTube video. Yet another statement that I'm not actually dead, and I just post videos once every eternity when something catches my eye, which this has. Everyone's reviewing it. It's time for my 2 cents. This is Daggerheart, the new roleplay game system from Darrington Press, the big competition, or so everyone believes, for D&D 5th edition, or the 2024 edition, whatever you want to call it. I have now played in a Daggerheart game. I have ran 2 Daggerheart games, and I'm currently trying to run an ongoing campaign. I have read through the rules pretty thoroughly, and I've tried to homebrew a little bit of stuff. So I think I know more than enough to properly review this. So as always, as I do in my reviews, I'm going to go over the cons and the pros, but we're going to have a special added section about how this compares to Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition or 2024 edition, whatever you want to call it, which is I think what people care most about. But first, as is tradition, what are the cons of the system? I'm a big roll-time player. I know my stuff. As I said, I've ran 2 games in this. What are the cons? What are the problems that I have with it? Because it does have cons. My first big con with it is its blatant imbalance. This is noticeable right off the bat with ancestries. Every single ancestry option has mechanical benefits. And you could argue this way or that way that they're pretty much balanced, except for the fungrel. The fungrel's special abilities are all just flavor text. They are. Now, ancestries is what you pick when you're starting to make your character. It's the type of creature you are. And as stated, all the other ancestries have specific mechanical bonuses. The extra hit point. They do a bit more damage if you do something specific. They can fly, yada, yada, yada. But the fungrel's benefits are pure flavor text. They don't necessarily help you out in game. And if they do help you out in game, it's something that the game master will see about doing. It's not something that will happen by default. So there's a blatant imbalance there. There's also a similar imbalance with some of the gear, like some of the armors in Tier 2, the first 3 armors. They're blatantly on par with each other, but after that, all the armors after that are all a bit stronger than the first 3 because they unquestionably have higher stats, and they all have nice little bonuses. And the way it reads before it gets them, it says, oh, you can give anybody from Tier 2 any of these armors, or let them pick whatever armors they want, but they're clearly not really balanced to each other. Now, balancing in a roleplay game system is something you're never going to fully get. But this book doesn't really try to hide it at all, and that might bother some game masters like me that really care about that kind of stuff, but it's definitely not something that's going to bug a lot of people. Not as much as my number 2 con, which for me is potentially grounds to hate this system, and that is how damage works. Okay, so here's how damage works. You have about 6 hit points as a character. A creature hits you. It rolls a whole bunch of dice. You total up the amount of damage it did, and then compare it to a set of numbers. And if it did enough damage, it actually does 3 hit points. And if it did enough damage, it does 2 hit points, and so on. And there's an optional rule where it does enough damage, it does 4 hit points of damage. Okay. You might be wondering why. Why does it have this extra math? Well, why don't you just roll the dice and subtract that from your actual health? Here's the legitimate reason. Everybody has 6 hit points, and a creature can only do at most 4 with optional rule. That means that every creature, in order to knock a player out, has to hit them at least twice. What this means is, if the game master was really, really dumb and picked the strongest creature imaginable to throw against a 1-level party, that creature could not 1-KO them in all one shot. They would undoubtedly live the 1 shot, take the 4 damage, stuff 2 hit points left, and be like, oh wow, we can't beat this thing, and then they'd run away. It is a safeguard to prevent an instant kill with a party. You cannot throw out a high-level creature and knock out a party in a single round. They will survive and they can run. It's a safeguard against dumb game masters. It also has the added benefit of a low-ranking creature against a high-ranking player still will typically do 1 damage, and that player will still typically have only 6 hit points, or maybe 7 or 8 if they put some experience into it. So still, they get hurt by that, significantly so. So low-level creatures still have an impact in the game. So it's kind of cool. It ensures that if you pick low-level creatures, they still work. And if you pick high-level creatures, you're not going to kill your party by accident. I get it. It is safeguards to make the game easier to run. The problem, and where this system falls apart with this concept, is there is a lot, and I mean a lot, of special abilities that allow you to do more damage and roll more dice. If you do what's called a smite, which is one of the cards you can use, you double your damage. If you do a tag team, you add the damage rolls together and do that to the damage. If you use special abilities, that adds damage dice. If you do all these things together, it gets kind of ridiculous. If you crit in this system, if you crit and you crit on a smite, you do way above what is necessary for the 4 points of damage for literally all creatures in the game. Now you might be wondering what's the problem with that. I'll tell you what's the problem with that. You're playing a game, somebody crits with a smite, they roll like they're like 20 dice, they're like, I did 200 points of damage, how much damage did I actually do? And you're like, wow, you did 4 hit points of damage, that was amazing. And then they're like, how much did I actually need to roll to get 4 hit points of damage? And then you're like, 40. So I rolled that extra and got the 200 literally for nothing. Yeah, you did all that for nothing. You see, it kind of punishes the player for doing really well. You get to the point where you're just rolling dice to roll dice. It's kind of frustrating, and I don't like it. It would be a lot less bad if there wasn't so many mechanics that added to the damage. But since there are so many mechanics, and since it emphasizes them so much, you're going to get this at the table quite often. Like, there's a whole section in this book about tag teaming and how awesome it is. But the only thing cool about tag teaming is it lets you roll more damage. And as illustrated, if you crit on a tag team, most of that damage is going to have literally no impact and have literally no value, and you'll feel like you spent free hope for literally nothing. And that's really bad. I can't imagine being a player, spending the free hope, doing this epic tag team, and then realizing half the dice I rolled had no impact. Ugh. I just can't wrap my mind around it. It just seems so mean. So, big negative there, but it accidentally became a little bit of positive, but we'll get to that. And the third and final negative, this wasn't throughout the book, but was noticeable at times. There was a few parts in the book that over-explained certain rules and made them feel a lot more complicated than they needed to be. There's a section in this book that explains how to roll dice, which is pretty straightforward, and it explains it in 3 pages. It makes the game seem a lot more complex than it actually is, and it makes it seem a bit more intimidating than it actually is. So that's a bit of a con. This could have been better written, and it didn't have to overcomplicate itself in some sections. There's also some parts about handling controversial topics and safety tools, and once again, this is pretty simple stuff, and it over-explains it to the point where it feels a bit intimidating, and it feels a bit too heavy to try and remember it all. If you were new to game mastering and you followed this book verbatim, it's going to make you very concerned about offending your players to the point where you might be like, I don't know if I want to run it, I might offend someone. According to this, I have to do all these like safety tools 24/7. And safety tools have their place, they have their purpose, but this just over describes and over breaks down everything to the point where it gets a bit hard to follow, and safety tools included. I've seen this stuff addressed way better in way more simpler, clear-cut, normal terms than this does. And it does really at times over-explain things to the point where it makes the game system seem a bit intimidating. And I guess the last con, the real last con, is I don't know why the rules are different for the game master as opposed to the player. The player rolls 2d12s, and if one dice is higher, it's good, and if the other dice is higher, it's bad. But the game master rolls a d20. Very similar to how the Dungeons and Dragons 5e system works. And the problem with this is, in other roleplay game systems where they have the rules similar to each other, if you play the game a few times, you learn the system well enough to run a game. And you can run a game just fine, you don't even have to read the rulebook. In this system, you cannot do that. You cannot play this game 3 or 4 times, learn it well enough, and then run it. No. You have to read the Game Master section of this game book to learn how to do it. And I feel that will make Game Masters of the system less common. I feel that will make this system, again, a bit more intimidating. I don't know why the rules had to be different for the two sides. I don't know why the Game Master can't just roll 2d12s like the player does. I'm rolling the d20 because it's what the rules suggest, and it's obviously what the game's balanced for, but I don't get why that is a thing. It does make the system harder to learn, and I don't see the benefit at all. Now, typically, with that list of cons, this system kind of sounds dead on arrival. That's a good bit. Like, that's not a lot of cons, but they're all pretty significant, especially to over-explaining and especially how damage is handled. So, with any other system, that system would be dead in the water. It would be over. It would be gone. Like, there'd be no point. But the positives somehow make up for it. Quite a bit. Impressively so. And I am a bit shocked after listing all those negatives that the positives do make up for it, to the point where this is actually a rather solid system, and I'm glad to be running a campaign. So let's go over those positives. So, big positive number 1. Every roleplay game system, you can homebrew stuff, and you can make up stuff as the game master. It's kind of a given. But this is the only roleplay game system that I have read, and I've read quite a few at this point, that has emphasized so much that you as the game master can homebrew stuff, and you should homebrew stuff. There is so many optional rules in this, and so much emphasizing that you can do whatever you want, and so much emphasizing that, yeah, we realize these rules aren't perfect, please rework them if you want. I have never read a role-play game system that emphasized that so much. And it instantly does impact the game. I've talked to some players that have mentioned that everybody they played with that's ran Daggerheart has ran it immensely differently. And that is not surprising at all, because this book just kind of demands you to homebrew it. And that's why I said earlier that the damage rules were actually a positive, because I didn't like it. But this book emphasized so much to homebrew stuff that I said, hey, if this book wants me to fix it, I'll fix it. And I added a lethal rule. Now, I don't think that fully fixes the problem. I think it's still a bit flawed, but I do think it helps. And it was very cool that the book kind of encouraged me off the bat to do that. I just added a small rule that said, if you roll triple over their damage threshold, you do lethal damage, and blah, blah, blah. So that way, if they're rolling their dice, that many dice actually pays off. I felt encouraged by the way this book is written to do that, and it felt immensely rewarding. In any other roleplay system, I would have been too intimidated to try to do that. This makes it much more clear that it's okay to do stuff like that. It also makes that much more clear because everything's a bit easier and simpler to balance. The ancestries, the creatures you decide to be when you start making your creature, they only have 2 pros to them. Only 2 points that you can modify. That means it's very easy to change and modify because you're like, okay, I only have to come up with 2 things, and in other roleplay systems, it would be like 6 or 7 things. This makes it a lot easier to make stuff up because you have to make up less. Same thing goes for classes. Classes just have 3 main core things. So once again, you just have to come up with 3 main core things, and you can homebrew it. Everything seems to be a bit more simplified in this, so making homebrew a bit more easier. And it does really seem to have that in mind. Like I said, ancestries are super simple. Classes themselves are super simple. Everything in this game feels a bit more on the simple side. Now, this game as a whole has a lot to it. But if you dissect all the little pieces, they are indeed little pieces, making homebrewing much more easier to achieve. This game system feels like it had homebrewing in mind from the get-go, emphasized every step of the way. And that's a big pro. The other big pro is something that I feel should be now in every roleplay system, and that is environmental stat blocks. They are so cool. So, creatures in a roleplay game tend to have stat blocks. You have like their hit points, how much damage they do, yada yada yada. In this, there's also environmental stat blocks. Environments have suggestions of what creatures should show up in them, what the difficulty should be for typical checks in them, and different plot beats that could happen in them. Now, I don't use these that often because I know what I'm doing, but for a new game master, these are really cool because it means you can just pick one and basically run almost all of the game with one. It makes improvising a game way easier because, as said, these environmental stat blocks suggest creatures to use, and they suggest plot points to have. Like one of them says, have a thief run out and try to steal stuff from the party. So literally suggests ideas for the game. If you're new to being a game master, you can literally just pick one of these environmental stat blocks, make a scene out of it, and that will make, admittedly, a short game, but still a game. It makes improvising a scene so much easier for newbie game masters. Another cool thing that does is a lot of the environmental stuff just has little cool mechanics. So I haven't been using the environmental stuff that much, but I've been just using those simple mechanics. Like I've been making basically simplified environmental stat blocks with just that one mechanic. Like I ran a fight using the desecrated ground mechanic in one of the environmental stat blocks. And that had the hope dice lower from a d12 to a d10. And it just changed the whole feel of the fight and made it really stand out and made it really gritty and hard. And I would never come up with that if it wasn't for these environmental stat blocks. So the unique mechanics within them are really cool, and I think they help out new game masters a whole bunch, and they're just a really interesting and cool idea in general. I don't think I need them anymore because I'm such a skilled game master, but I think they should be something in every roleplay game. Now, you will lose points if you're a roleplay game and you don't have environmental stat blocks. I'm sorry, you will. You will. You will lose points. Now, that's only the 2 pros, but all the other pros, and there are more, are all stuff that are direct comparisons with Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Like I said, that's going to be the final point. Final section of this review. We are there. Because everything else that's a pro, other game systems try to do, specifically Dungeons & Dragons 5e, and I'm just going to give away the ball, this system is better at all those things. So let's do a proper comparison between this and Dungeons & Dragons 5e. So first off, where this really starts just beating the other system to death is weapons. Like I said, the weapons and the armors are not well balanced, which is a bit annoying. But in Dungeons & Dragons, there's like barely any weapons, and they're very class specific. So every rogue is using the exact same weapons, and every knight is using the exact same weapons, and every monk is... It becomes very repetitive. This has a lot of different weapons. A lot. And you can personalize your character with the weapon you're using. Same goes for armor. It has a lot of different armors. And once again, you can personalize your character to a significant extent with the armors that you're using. You cannot do this in Dungeons and Dragons whatsoever. Any class can use any weapon in this, unless it's magical. There's a whole stipulation there. And every class can use pretty much any armor in this. You can really personalize your character with weapons and armor. Dungeons and Dragons does not do that at all. This gives you another way to unique your character and make your character more its own. So this does that way better than Dungeons and Dragons could ever dream of doing. Weapons and armor in this beat the snot out of Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition or 2024 or whatever you want to call it. Beats the snot out of it. Another thing that is unquestionably better in this system is balancing of encounters. The map here is a lot more clear, it's a lot more easier to do, and the creatures have stated things that they are, like a leader or a bruiser or a minion. There's actually suggestions in them of how to use the things. So it makes it more clear if the fight is going to be balanced or not, or if it's going to kill your party, and it makes it more clear how to make the fight dynamic and more interesting. The creatures are categorized so you can figure out what works cool in a fight and what doesn't. And like I said, with the environmental bonuses in that, it can make some fights really interesting. Much more so than Dungeons and Dragons. Also, the stat blocks for the Daggerheart creatures are a lot smaller and a lot more simplified, so they're far easier to read. I remember when I tried to run Dungeons and Dragons games, I had to reread the stat blocks multiple times to understand the creature and its quirks. This, I can just read it while I'm running the game. They are that simplified. You do not have to over-research your creatures, which saves you so much time. So much time. I cannot emphasize how much time that saves you as a game master. Oh my god. Next big benefit. In Dungeons and Dragons, you get like a feat every 4 free levels or so, and you use those feats to personalize your character. In this, you have a table. Every time you level up, you can pick an extra hit point. Or you can pick a lesser chance to get hit. Or you can pick better armor or more experience or yada yada. So you get what I'm feeling, what I'm saying. Dungeons and Dragons, every 4 levels or so, you pick something that unifies you. Daggerheart, you uniquify yourself every time you level up. The cards that you get throughout the game as you level up, your different cards, those are the feats. And you literally get a new card every time you level up. And you pick which card you want to have. So you personalize your character through leveling up in this far more than Dungeons and Dragons. Characters have a lot more variance, and you can do a lot more different stuff, and it doesn't just feel like everybody's the same. You can make your characters actually unique. With Dungeons and Dragons, there's whole entire videos explaining how to make this guy, and all they do is they cross different classes in different ridiculous ways because the system doesn't work well for making different things out of the box. You have to think really hard and do tricky stuff. Whereas this, it's kind of self-explanatory and it just is built in. And added to that, here's something really cool that you don't realize is really cool until you've run a whole lot of roleplay games like I have. Like I said, every time you go up, you get a card that's a feat that you get to pick. Once again, personalizing your character. But the most cards you can have are 5. You can't have more than that. The moment you get the 6, you gotta drop 1. Now you might think, oh, this is limiting. This is so limiting. Why? I have played in game systems that lets you get unique abilities every single time you level up and have had high-end levels. And that was Starfinder. Let you in the thing. Starfinder. And I played in a high game of Starfinder. We got to level 16. And there was so many different special abilities that we needed books to run our characters and we forgot half the stuff we could do every single game, and it just all felt pointless, and like we were doing study work every time we played the game. This system was made by people who played a whole lot of role-play games and realized there has to be a hard limit about how many cool things you can do. If you have too many, then you just get lost in the character. And this puts a hard limit on it, but still allows you to level up and change over time. I love the 5-card limit. It shows that these people have played a lot of games and know what they're doing and are doing it well. And Dungeons & Dragons does not have a feat limit. Your character will eventually get more complicated. Definitely not complicated not to run, like you'll never get into that territory, but this makes sure that your character always stays simple and that you can run them with ease. This is better than Dungeons & Dragons in that aspect. And I will also say the non-initiative system. This game system has no initiative. Most roleplay game systems have an initiative where you go first, another person goes, yada, yada, yada. This does not have initiative. The players go when they think they should go, and when one of them screws up and fails in a roll, or rolls their fear dice higher, then the game master gets to move. Now, I will disagree with the system in the fact that it makes fights faster. It does not. It does not. The fights are just as long as in Dungeons & Dragons, if not longer. I found the fights a bit longer. But what it does do is, okay, so I was running this fight where I had archers shooting at the party. And the party was doing very well. It was killing off some of the archers. There was one left. The one left, the bagged archer, jumped off the side of the building, was propelling down the building on a rope. And one of the party members ran to the other side of the building and shot that dude in the shoulder. But they succeeded with fear, so I got the move afterwards. I'm like, you hit him in the shoulder, and he spins around and shoots back at you through reflex. And that happened. Now, if this was a Dungeons & Dragons game, I would have just moved by having him go down the side of the road, and the player would have just moved by shooting the arrow and hitting him in the shoulder. And then my character wouldn't have been able to move until everyone else beat him to death. So, I have never played a game before where the thing felt kind of like a movie, and different things caused other things to happen. Because that player hit that dude in the shoulder, it caused him to spin around and shoot back. The one directly impacted the other. The one action resulted in the other. So it causes this very kind of cinematic, this causes that, causes this, causes that kind of feel. And I've noticed that in all the fights that I've been in and ran in this system so far. They all have these moments where one thing directly causes another thing. They're all very cinematic in that feel, and that makes the fights feel very unique and very kind of charming. I wouldn't say this is my favorite way of handling combat. I kind of like the Alien RPG system because it's turn-based, but it's so limited, it's really quick. But this results in some very cinematic and super engaging moments. So its fights are much more captivating than Dungeons & Dragons. And this beats out Dungeons & Dragons in that. So let's go over this again. It has better weapons, better armor. You can personalize your character a whole lot more. The leveling up system is better handled. The feats are better managed. Initiative works a lot better in this type of game system. It encourages homebrewing a lot more. And also, the reason why I dislike Dungeons & Dragons 2024 so gosh darn much is because some people had rightful complaints about the lore for orcs and dwarves and all that. And people from Wizards of the Coast removed the lore from orcs and drow and a couple of other things, which is fine. and then they replaced it with absolutely positively nothing, just blank pages. And unlike this book, they didn't encourage people to homebrew their own mythology or anything. They just got lazy and gave us nothing. This has in its last chapter whole blasted unique original campaign settings with lore. This emphasizes that you should homebrew and make up your own stuff, but it also gives you all this optional lore. So yeah, their stuff is bare bones too, but it feels like a lot because it gives you all this optional lore. Dungeons and Dragons got cold feet and got scared and decided to be lazy and just have blank blasted pages and felt like it was just sitting on its butt doing nothing. Whereas this said, well, if the players do find how Drow are handled no good, maybe they should just make it up, but maybe we should encourage that by making up our own worlds and making it so clear how easy that is to do. This has like 6 or 7 different game settings in the core book, which brings us to our final positive with Daggerheart compared to Dungeons and Dragons. You only need one book! You don't have to buy free stupid books to run the stupid game! Like, seriously. That itself makes Dungeons and Dragons pure trash. There is no other roleplay game system I'm aware of where you have to buy free blasted books to run one blasted game. That is so stupid, it can't be emphasized enough. This needs one book. Most roleplay game systems need one book. This is just one book, and this is all you need. This is all you need. So yes, I do feel that despite this system being rather flawed in some aspects, that it beats Dungeons and Dragons in every conceivable way, and therefore, we don't need that game anymore. This one is a D&D killer. Every second YouTube video I see is like, Daggerheart is not a YouTube killer. D&D will live on. Why? Why? When you have a system that literally does everything better, why would the bad system live on? Why? Why would it live on? Because you're dumb and you want to keep paying for it? So, yeah, this is a solid game system. It has its flaws. It's not my favorite system, but I'm glad to be running a campaign in it. I think it's rather creative. I think it does a lot of good stuff with encouraging homebrew, and I do think the non-initiative system is creative and makes for some very impactful and very cool fight scenes. And the environmental stat blocks is literally the smartest idea I've seen in a roleplay game system in quite some time. So, I'm glad I own this, flaws and all. And I am very glad to never run a Dungeons & Dragons 5e or 2024 edition ever again. So, play Daggerheart. And then check out other roleplay game systems, because there's even better systems than this that aren't as flawed. Like Alien RPG is like really blasted cool.